helped helped me, and hello everybody. Hello.
Hello, Pia.
Okay.
Yeah.
I hope to hear something very interesting, very big, very special.
You better go and listen to someone else if you want something interesting.
Not seen you for a while, Pia. Good to know you there.
Oh, so
George.
I think we haven't seen maybe since 2012.
Yes, yeah.
Paddler have in love with my Antarctica explorer. I name her my best friends on the water, whom I can trust and manage, who can manage with me.
Right.
Very good. What I'd like to hear.
Yeah. Pia, tonight we have a friend of ours coming on he's originally Dutch, but has lived in England a long time, but loves to practice his Estonian. We'll put you in touch.
I've never had this many people in my room before. A bit crowded.
Can you all see each other?
Right. Here, Rachel. Why is Rachel monochrome? You got steam radio? Rachel?
Yeah.
Why are you black and white?
I'm not.
You are. Well, you are on my screen.
Well, I'm not on mine.
Oh, you look fine.
You haven't got colour yet, Rosie.
Hey, that's better.
I hope you're not waiting for me to talk, Tom. Are you going to tell us when everyone's ready?
Yeah, we're at 60 at the moment, Nigel, so we're still waiting for about 20 people. So let's just give them a few more minutes.
Yeah, no panic.
And it is exactly 7 o'clock, so we're early.
Yeah.
Did you not prepare a routine for this moment?
We did.
We should have done I don't know, what to do.
I do think it's time to sing happy birthday to Linda.
Sing away, Tom.
There's better singers than me, Rachel. Hard to believe, but there are.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Linda. Happy birthday to you.
Oh, thank you very much.
Oh dear, I forgot to wash my hands.
No.
Is it not in there on the shelf?
Και εγώ αυτό έψαχνα, την πρίζα, δεν έχει πρίζα, τι να το κάνω χωρίς πρίζα.
So you don't need your mask on now. that above thing.
What?
What you see is what's left.
Tom, I think we've kind of stabilised at 65 people. I can let people in late, so if you want to make a start, I think that would be fine.
Thank you very much, Paul. I'll start with an introduction, and the voice there was Paul, who's been the wizard that sorted out the Zoom, and without whom I wouldn't be here tonight. Welcome, everybody. It's fantastic to have a response of 85 people booking in. 30 of those people are from the Wansbeck Club, and that's what Nigel was expecting to be speaking to. But fantastically, we've got extra people from throughout the UK, from Ireland, Canada, USA, Norway, Greece, Latvia, Romania, Estonia, Denmark, and the Netherlands. And I have to say what a great privilege it is to be involved in a small club and have this contact and reach. And I know it's all because of Nigel, but it is a great honour to be sharing time with you all. I've known Nigel a long time, and I've had many great times with him. My favourite time of all was a trip in the Hebrides when Nigel and Lizzie were sharing a tandem boat with Lizzie in the front. I think Lizzie was about 12, 13, and kept asking, is he paddling? Pointing her thumb over her shoulder at her dad, who was paddling, but she couldn't notice. That's all it is. I hope we all have a good time. We'll be doing some questions at the end, but now it's time to go over to Nigel, and I'm sure we're going to have a really thrilling talk. It'd be really good if everybody could mute their contacts, their Zoom, although I have to admit I don't know how to do that, so I'll just be quiet. So over to Nigel.
Okay, thank you.
Nigel, you're on mute now.
Yeah, can I hear?
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we've got you now.
Yeah, got you.
Okay, all right. Well, I'd like to thank you, Tom, for asking me to give a talk. This is the first Zoom talk I've given. So, yeah, it's a new one for me as well. I've got quite a few different talks, but people normally want to see the general one. So I'm not quite sure. I think it's 39 years of sea kayaking now. Been very, very lucky because kayaking's taken me all over the world. And it was way back in the late 70s that I started to kayak. And I thought then it would be very easy to become a kayak bum. So I decided that I would try and earn a living, and I just thought that I'd do a paddle trip every 2 or 3 years, really. So way back in the 90s, there wasn't much happening on Anglesey. There was no real tuition you could go to or anything. So there was a guy called Tom, and Tom Hughes and myself. Tom had the pub in Chemice Bay, and we were on top of Holyhead Mountain one day, and we decided to give sea kayaking a go. So the next breath, we thought, what should we do? So neither of us had sat in the boat before, but we set ourselves the task of learning how to paddle and paddling around Great Britain. Gave ourselves 2 years to learn. So that was quite an experience, really, because we had to find someone that would take us serious, because round Britain hadn't been done before. And the only one that didn't laugh, because we couldn't paddle, was Frank Goodman. So we got 2 Nordcaps, and I can remember getting the Nordcap home. I was so proud. I wasn't going to leave it in the garden. I took it in through the bedroom window, and it lived at the bottom of Joni and I's double bed for about a year. So that's how I started talking to people. And what I'd like to say is that when I say modern day sea kayaking, it's anything in a fiberglass boat. So this is the 70s, early 70s, really. So what I call the godfathers of modern day sea kayaking was Derrick Hutchinson, who's was from up north, Sam Cook, Pateley Bridge. Sam did a lot of the initial work on developing, which you'll see in a minute, the hatch covers and things, and then designed the Nordcap from the Antarctica. And this is the boat that they originally worked on, which was actually a Linden's farm, which was a copy of the Antarctica. But here you can see on the left-hand side here, this was the first fiberglass hatch cover. And it was actually 2 hatch covers with 4 bolts. And you'd lock the hatch in place, twist it, and the bolts would separate the covers and jam solid in the rim around it. So nothing much new from there, really, because if you see this here was a hole for a cut down BDH container, pump, little compass recess. So all of this was invented by Sam Cook and a few of the guys that were going on the first fiberglass sea kayak expedition in those days, big one, which was round Nordcap itself. So on the deck line there, cut down BDH bottle with all the kit that goes in it. They also developed first time spray deck and vest all in one. So that was another bit of an invention for this expedition. By the time they did the first Nordcap, they'd fitted these Lieberlock hatch covers on. And I can remember my kayak had one of these, and we used to put 2p pieces, 2 pennies, I should say, pieces underneath the Lieberlock. So as it wore, we used to just put more and more packing pieces to keep it shut. Map case, still one of the best map cases on the right there, bit of plastic taped on the deck, can't get washed off. Sam's kayak here, in those days, tents were bigger. You can see knee tubes here. There was the top knee tube was to put the tent in, bottom knee tube was to put the flask in. Obviously, all the tape around the cockpit rim just to save the spray cover. So this is Sam Cook in his early days, and this is a photograph of them in the early Nordcaps, getting ready for the Nordcap in Norway expedition. For the same expedition, they developed with Alistair from Lendl, they developed the Nordcap paddle, same expedition. And here you can see on the Nordcap, no skegs. There was a separate skeg with a band that you slipped over the back end. So that was the first skeg. So this is preparation for the maiden trip. The other, what I call godfather of sea kayaking, was obviously Frank Goodman. And we all know Frank Goodman designed the Home Pier Point whitewater course as well. And here he is on opening day with royalty. So in those days, Sam and his colleagues did a lot of work, and they went on to design a lot of clothing, buoyancy aids, etc., etc. And they also went round most of Spitsbergen and used the kayaks as sledges to cross Spitsbergen. And this is a slide from then. So sea kayaking is, I think, fantastic sport. We can all do it. We can all go on expeditions. An expedition is only a series of one-day trips. I think what stops most people doing it is the unknown and the fear of doing it. But I just think if you think every day is a one-day trip, and if you wake up in the morning, you don't fancy it, don't go out. So it's no real different to all being at home. Okay, so this is Natalie and Alon. And these folks, it's another good talk for you if you ever get hold of them. Natalie and Alon actually lived out with the Inuits and recorded their way of life for about 2 winters, I think. So lots of things being done. So if we go back after 2 years, I can remember Tom and I used to get, well, he used to get rescued, fortunately, more than I got rescued. But bear in mind, we taught ourselves from scratch. So I think we've still got a photograph somewhere of my first day, which is where the dog's walking behind me and I'm paddling in about 6 inches of water. Tom had launched in Chemice Bay, capsized, got tangled up, couldn't get out of his boat. And people had jumped in from the harbour wall to make sure he was okay. So after 2 years of bit by bit setting ourselves goals, we decided in May 1980 to set out from Holyhead. So we'd go from Holyhead and we'd go round Britain in a clockwise direction. Frank Goodman had helped us with, not with sponsored kayaks, but with cheaper kayaks. And whilst we were training, Paul Caffin, who paddled around Australia solo and New Zealand and various other places, he wanted to do the expedition as well. So, and he asked Frank for help. So Frank said he wouldn't help Paul because he was supporting Tom and I. So anyway, Tom and I had a conversation with Paul for about an hour on the phone, and we decided to get together. And the 3 of us set out from Holyhead. So 2,500 miles, 65 paddling days, approximately 38 miles per day. We had 18 bad weather days and we only had 2 actual days off. The days off were quite funny, really, because after a week, Tom said he couldn't go any further, and not Tom, Paul said he couldn't go any further and he had to have a day off. So we had a day off. A week later, I was in the same boat. And then after that, we just got stronger and stronger. 3 of us set off. We set off from Holyhead, which I'll come back to in a minute. But this is a shot of my kayak. And just to show you how things have moved on, this panel here, with all the bolts round, was the smallest panel we could build into the kayak to get a VHF radio in. So just shows you how things have moved on since then. This is at Holyhead. We'd been waiting for 2 or 3 days to start and the weather had been bad. So eventually we thought we'd go anyway. I can remember that day going around Carmel Head and it was pretty rough, and we got to Kemlin and Tom said, well, if that's day 1, it's not for me. So Tom packed his bags and there was just Paul and myself left. But on all these expeditions, there's separate talks really, but so that was the start and this was the finish. But basically, we managed to prove that you could do long days, because in those days, people didn't think we could do long days, day after day after day, and keep it up. And it's quite interesting because I've got copies of Canoe Press and things saying that we wouldn't be able to keep it up. But after 2 weeks, I'm pretty convinced now that anyone after 2 weeks slowly gets stronger and stronger. So this is Paul on the left, myself on the right. Equipment's moved on. In those days, my spray deck here was a canvas spray deck, and I'd used to rub zinc castor oil paste into spray deck to keep it waterproof. But it was a great finish to the trip. We had the big lifeboat in front, the little lifeboat at the back, and the helicopter over the top. And they guided us round the end of the harbour and into Holyhead Harbour. So I've had a lot to do with the lifeboat over the years. I was coxswain of Holyhead. There were 4 of us, different coxswains, because obviously you need just one coxswain because you're continually changing. So I've also fortunately been involved in a lot of training with sea kayaks and working out how to rescue sea kayakers, etc., etc. So that was an early shot here, and that's Justine, who obviously did all, this is the sea videos. And here you've got a shot of us practicing with 22 Squadron being rescued. You can see the casualty on the decks there and the winchman coming in. So this kayak was Peter Bray's kayak. So this is the first kayak that was kayaked from Newfoundland to Ireland across the Atlantic. So Pete's, it was the first, all the others had been rowing boats. So there's a compartment in the back here. This little pipe there is from the bilge pump. And when we were training with Pete and putting him through the paces, the local coxswain up on our lifeboat said, Pete, you need to put a non-return valve in there. Well, he didn't. And the first time he was rescued, another really good lecture if you get hold of Pete. He's got a funny tale to tell about being in a life raft for a number of hours in his underpants and the pump. But he got rescued. He sorted the boat out, and on the second time, he successfully crossed the Atlantic. So it was in the 80s that we sold our first centre, and we built this centre, which lots of people will know as the centre at Porthdabock, where we based the Sea Kayak Symposium. So this centre I designed and we imported from Sweden with a modular building type construction. So we're now at Cape Horn. So most people think that these islands off the end are actually Cape Horn, but it's not. Cape Horn's this little island down here. So the idea in 92 was to actually get Rebecca Ridgway around Cape Horn, who was to be the first female to successfully circumnavigate Cape Horn. So I can remember John Ridgway, and basically what I can remember was I was at a prep school, a boarding school, and I can remember us all sat on the stairs watching John Ridgway and Che Blythe being the first to row across the Atlantic. So I'd seen John even from when I was 13. So anyway, I got a phone call one day from John saying he's got a group of, I think there was a group of 5, and he wanted to kayak round Cape Horn, and could I go up and give them some lessons? So I said yes, jumped in the car and right up to Cape Wrath. And I can remember thinking, because John was a very go-getter person, and I thought, how do we show him what this is all about? So basically I took them out and we went out round an island, and everyone capsized, so I managed to rescue them all and back in. And that night John said, do you fancy coming with us? So I said to John, I'd come, providing I could bring a second paddler, which was Aled Williams. And obviously Aled helped me at the centre and was involved with the Romany and went on to work for Tide Race and Rockpool and various other places. So, but this expedition grew and grew. So this slide here is John Ridgway with Shea Blythe on the boat there, which they rowed across the Atlantic. So when I went up there, it must have been blowing about a 5-6. So there was a massive camera, the old cameras that they put on the front deck. And they said, can you roll? So I said, well, of course I can roll. So they said, can you roll with the camera on? So I said I'd try. So I capsized and I couldn't roll with this camera on the deck. It was quite windy. And I must have had 6 or 7 attempts. And the camera was rolling all the time. And eventually I came out. Well, they showed it on national television. So that kicked things off. So News at 10 decided to film the expedition, but they wanted to film it from a kayak as well. So they sent along a cameraman called John Boyce, who couldn't paddle. So I thought the best way of getting him round would be to put him in a double. So John went in a double. Then British Telecom contacted us and said, we would like you to test all the equipment for the Around the World 1994 Whitbread race. It was the first expedition that was going to use GPS to sail around the world, and they needed to know 2 things. One, that Cape Horn was actually where it should be, and 2, that the system operated on what they called the edge of the footprint, satellite footprint, where the GPS signal would come through. So it sounds funny. Cape Horn is obviously a fairly high island, so it's got a trig point on it. So that is definitely where it should be. But the boundary between Argentina and Chile is actually about 1.5 miles out, because most of the Beagle Channel then was not accurately on the charts. So that's what we did. So, but that required a support boat because of all the equipment, required another technician. So this expedition just started to grow and grow. And I think in the end, it probably cost about £250,000. Spival Anglia also got involved, and we ended up making a documentary of it as well. This slide here, just to show you, on my thumb there, you can see a little graze. From that little graze, I got blood poisoning. So on all these trips, I always like to take a broad-based antibiotic. So fortunately, I put myself on that. And because we had all the satellite equipment, I called my doctor in Holyhead. And the doctor was able to diagnose what it was and told me to get to a hospital as soon as I could. And British Telecom were made up because obviously it was really good advertising for their system. And just around the wrist there, that dark brown bit, the local Indians actually wrapped seaweed around my wrist. And I can only think it was because of the iodine in the seaweed. So this is the Compass Rose, the boat, the support boat that we took. What people don't realize, a support boat in this neck of the woods is not of too much value, because when the wind comes in, it comes in quickly. And sometimes that support boat might be 25 miles away seeking shelter. Hanging Glacier here, that ice cap on the top is 250 foot high, give you some idea of scale. Cape Horn, this is all that you had at Cape Horn then. Cape Horn is a little radio shack there, and there was one small little chapel, and that is Cape Horn. Chile, fantastic place. It's the only place that I know where you can walk up a volcano and look down and see it bubbling. So in '95, the Romany was born. So I'd asked Frank Goodman, he had, if I could take the Anasakuta and turn it into a school boat, which he said yes. And I can't remember, I did the work on that and I can't remember what it was called now. But anyway, that didn't work out as well as I'd planned. And then
Sorry, Nigel, it's a pintail you made, the pintail.
Pintail, that's right. Thank you very much. So then I went back and decided to design a school boat. So we worked on the Romany. The Romany was born. It was the first sea kayak ever to have a proper fitted keyhole cockpit. The day hatch at the back became a standard feature. And in those days, Mike Webb from Rockpool used to work at the center as well. And it was his idea to polish the recesses, because up to now, they'd used rubber inserts for the recess. So the Romany actually was quite a breakthrough kayak. So that was in '94, we started building kayaks. Initially it was Nigel Dennis kayaks, and then we changed it to Sea Kayak UK. So we now make carbon boats of all different specifications, all different artwork, etc., full carbon, all sorts. Now, at the moment, we employ about 20 people, and this is Ad. There's 2 or 3 of them that have got tattoos, but it's quite funny because Ad went to work for Rockpool, but he came back to us, so he hadn't wasted his money on his tattoo. But that was Ad. So then we went into plastic. So in amongst all of this, we just carried on doing expeditioning every 2 or 3 years. And I teamed up in the early days. No one in the UK wanted to buy a sea kayak with a keyhole cockpit. They all wanted ocean cockpits. So the ocean cockpit stopped us selling any kayaks in the UK. So there's a guy called Stan Schladdick, who happened to be the importer of Valley Canoe products. He said, I like the boat, Nigel, I'll take 6. So the first year we sold 6 kayaks to America, and it grew and grew. So all our development work, and for the first probably 10 years, the only market where we sold boats was America. And then fortunately, I decided that we had too many eggs in one basket, and we sort of slowed down selling to America and opened up selling to the rest of the world, really, or as much of it as we could sell to. So this is Easter Island. Easter Island is basically 3 volcanoes. And it's, we all think we do lots of research, but I can remember thinking, oh, it's hot over there, it's quite nice. So we didn't do much research, but it never blew less than a force 5, 6. So we should have done a lot more research than we did. But this is the expedition where I actually made the weirdest decision of my paddling career, really, because there's a little, where are we? There's a little, that I'll show you the aerial picture, but where that red road goes right to the north of the island, you can see a little bay. We were in that bay and we left, and the wind was blowing from left to right, and it was blowing about a force 5, 6 when we left. And as we left, the dark sky got darker and darker, and it was obvious that there was strong wind and a lot of wind going to come in. So we couldn't really get back. You couldn't land anywhere because it's all a volcanic shore and there's quite a swell. So we decided to paddle straight out to sea for about 2.5 miles. And the idea was to go as far north as possible, so when the westerly winds hit, we could turn and go downwind, because you can only paddle downwind when the winds get to a certain strength. It must have increased to force 7, 8. And the idea was that we could go downwind hopefully skirt round the end of the island into the lee of the island. So I think that was the weirdest decision on the sea ever made, but it certainly paid off. And that's the little bay. You can see the rocky coastline. It's all volcanic, all swells, and it looks nice, but it's not very hospitable. Easter Island, we all know Easter Island. Fantastic statues there, how they destroyed the island by making these big stone statues and then cutting all the trees down to transport the statues, and they slowly destroyed the island. So this is Stan and I setting off to paddle around Easter Island. Israel. I think I was with, I paddled the coast of Israel with Fiona Whitehead. Fiona's not been on the scene for a while, but in those days, she'd done the first solo circumnavigation of Ireland and Britain, which is roughly, funnily enough, the same mileage as going just round Britain and going round Liverpool Bay. But this is the coast of Israel, not very far, about 250 miles. Fantastic to see places like Jericho, Jerusalem, Bethlehem. If anyone wants to go to Israel, there's an expedition center out there that Omar and Sagi run. It's the kayaking is a bit limited, but it's fine if you're going for a week plus. And if you want to combine it with seeing all the Jericho and religious sites and things, it's a fantastic place to go. So we did an expedition there on the Dead Sea. So this is the Dead Sea. This is not ice, it's salt. So I can't remember, this must have been in the 90s as well. And I can always remember because Sagi came down and he said, I want you to take this machine gun. I said, what am I going to do with that? He said, put it in a dry bag and put it on the front deck, because obviously they were worried about getting into trouble with the Palestinians and things. So I think I spent the whole trip trying to work out how I'd fire this thing from the sea kayak. But anyway, fortunately, we didn't need them. Then in 2010, purchased Lendl. Now, Alistair and Marion had up in Lendlefoot, Scotland, they developed Lendl and they'd sold Lendl to Johnson & Johnson Outdoors in the States. And Johnson & Johnson Outdoors had decided that manufacturing paddles wasn't for them. So I'd been involved in some of the design work with Johnson & Johnson, and they put it on the market, and obviously they were trying to get a good price for it. But about 3 years later, when they hadn't been able to sell it, we agreed to buy Lendl. So all the equipment that had been shipped to America from Scotland then came back to us in Anglesey, and to this day we're still manufacturing all the Lendl range. So that was 2010. So in 2013 we rebranded from Lendl to Celtic Paddles. So now we do paddles for both sea, whitewater, and we do quite a lot for pack rafting as well. And this is obviously some surf paddles as well. Now this is the west coast of Ireland, and it always amazes me, but they're now surfing in shoes, 30-foot faces. So this is Des McClintock, I think it is. And Des says, I don't have a problem if I know I'm going in, I have to bend forward, turn around and make sure the paddle runs alongside the side of the shoe. And if he didn't tuck in and position his paddle in a wave this big, it would just snap his paddle in half. So not surprising really. So some of the equipment here is manufacturing the paddles. There's some shots here. This is Jeff Allen in Charter Bay. And here we've got Lizzie, my daughter Lizzie. So Lizzie's married Craig. You probably, the local people will know Lizzie and Craig. Craig tried to outdo me, obviously, because he was one of the only ones with his brother and had to go around Britain the wrong way. But there we are. Did a very good job. And I think probably still the only group to go around Britain the wrong way. Anyway, Craig's married Lizzie, and this is Lizzie, my daughter, paddling around Gibraltar. So Gibraltar has meant a lot to me over the years. We've done, I think, 11 crossings of the Gibraltar Straits, all illegal because you can't really get permission to do it. I don't think I'd fancy my chances now, but basically the first time we did it, we crossed from Tarifa to Morocco. So on the southern end of the map here is Morocco, and that peninsula sticking out is Ceuta. And then on the north, you've got Gibraltar on the right, and you've got Spain on the left of the bay. So I think the first time we did it, we got picked up and we got put in a dungeon for 3 days in Morocco, Tangiers, which wasn't too friendly. And I can remember coming out of the dungeon and seeing 2 German vehicles in the compound there. One, nobody knew anything about. The second one, because we took the registration and we found out who owned the vehicle. And I can remember we drove about 3 days to let the people know that the vehicle was in the main police station in Tangiers. And the guy had disappeared 2 years previously and nobody had heard anything from him. Anyway, once we worked out how to do this, there's, you can see the Gibraltar, the chart on the right. Gibraltar has the navigational rights halfway across the straits. Then the problem you have is Morocco claim the straits and Spain claims the Gibraltar Straits. So what you've actually got to do is to get across before anyone knows you're there, unless you get official permission. And if you get official permission, you need support boats, you need all sorts of things. So in those days, we'd only kayak from Spain, the Spanish Gibraltar side, across to Morocco, because obviously the other way, you'd have people smuggling both people and drugs. So obviously no one's going to smuggle stuff to Morocco. So this is Gibraltar here, and this is what you call no man's land. So to the right of this beach is owned by Gibraltar. To the left of the beach is owned by Spain. So we used to come in to Gibraltar and camp here, and we'd set off at 5 o'clock in the morning when it was dark to get across to the other side before the katabatic winds sort of came in with the heat of the day. Lots of funny stories and awkward stories around Gibraltar. I can remember the first time we paddled in about a 4-6 through the harbour entrance, and we turned right to get some shelter straight away, and we paddled straight into a nuclear submarine pen. Well, talk about the shit hitting the fan. They thought we were Greenpeace, and there were police on mopeds and all sorts. Anyway, we got out of that. I can remember another year, we'd come in, we'd camped, we'd crossed successfully. And then about 2 days later, because we used to catch the ferry back from Morocco, about 2 days later, I got a phone call from the military police in Gibraltar asking if I would go and talk to them. And I thought about this and I thought, well, I said, well, no, because you'll probably lock us up because we shouldn't have been doing what we were doing. And they said, no, we just want to talk to you. So I agreed, went into Gibraltar, went to see the military police, and they said, all we want to know is how you've done this, because you've paddled into Gibraltar, you've camped on this beach, you've paddled out of Gibraltar, nobody saw you come in, nobody saw you go out, and we're on black alert, which is the biggest alert they've got. And it just shows you that at night, kayaks are very, very hard to be seen. So, and here we are getting ready, sort of, as I said, 5 o'clock in the morning, preparing to set off to cross. This is a slide from the first crossing where we were picked up by the military in Morocco and taken off to Tangiers prison. I can always remember the dungeon because I can remember walking in and we were interviewed, and then I can remember being taken down the stairs and the air was getting heavy, and we got down, they took our belts, they took our shoelaces, they took the cameras, they took everything like that. And they showed us into this dungeon. And I can remember to this day, it was like the size of a double garage, 2 double garages with a stone, with a square arch in between. And in the corner of one of these was a tap, which was the drinking water. Well, we were the only ones there because this must have been early in the morning. But by midnight, there was only standing room in these dungeons. And in the morning, they used to come in and they used to take people, they'd string them up by their feet, they'd cane the bottoms of their feet, and they'd chase them up and down the corridor and things. So it was a pretty scary experience, really, but quite an interesting one, because I never realized that you could go in with Western standards and within about 3 hours, if you had to, you'd have done anything to survive, and it just everything went out the window. But fortunately, they eventually let us out after trying to charge us with dealing in prostitution, dealing in stolen cars, and smuggling drugs. I think they were only after money, but what you don't do is ask sea kayakers for a load of money, because we seldom have it on us or have it. Then the last time we crossed, I'm not sure, was this the time? It might have been the time that Tom was with us. I'm not sure. I can't remember, but we set out and we were out in the middle, and one of the ferries had spotted us, and they sent out a Spanish frigate, and they came alongside us, and I just said to everyone, well, keep paddling and I'll talk to them. And they wanted us to turn back. So I said to the captain of the frigate, if you want us to turn back, you'll have to escort us, because in the Gibraltar Strait, the tide continually floods in, filling up the Med. And I said, all we're going to do is miss Gibraltar and we'll be way out in the middle of the Med and you'll have to rescue us. So he said, well, okay, carry on then. So we paddled across to Ceuta, and as we came into Ceuta, this is Ceuta, which is owned by Spain, because we'd been there every year for the past few years, the local customs officer sort of ran down saying, Denis, Denis, passports, passports. So we gave him our passports and he quickly ran into the office with them. And as we paddled round the corner, on the end of every jetty was a submachine gun that belonged to the Guardia. So there was a Guardia with a submachine gun on the end, waiting really to pick us up. But because the marina was the territory of the marina, they managed to get our passports, get them stamped, and we just about got away with that. And that was the last time we tried to cross or crossed the Gibraltar Straits. Whilst we were there, this couple, these set out, they took, I think they took 4 years to paddle round the whole of Europe in Kleppers. Didn't have the heart to say that while they'd been paddling, another country had joined, so they haven't quite done it, but there we go. But what a trip they must have had. For a period of time, I went to Borneo, not Borneo, Belize, because I went to train up some of their army personnel to become kayak instructors. So that was always good fun, because every time you'd have to be taken into the jungle, and you'd have to do a jungle survival course before you were allowed out with the trainee coaches and instructors. So here is Antarctica. So Antarctica is a very hard place to get into. You don't actually need permission to go to Antarctica, but you need to be able to get there with your equipment, which is very, very difficult. So scientific stations are the obvious ones to go into Antarctica through, but none of them will help you. They will help you if you just arrive on their doorstep, but if they help you into Antarctica, they're actually responsible for your rescue. But we found this base, which isn't really a scientific research station, but it's called one. It's a Czechoslovakian station. And I'm not quite sure if the gentleman's still alive, but he'd built this and he'd been there for about 10 years before we went, and he'd named it the Czechoslovakian Research Station, but it cost us about £2,000 all in to fly into Santiago, onto Punta Arenas, and then get a military Hercules that flew us into Antarctica to King George Island, dropped us off and said, get back here on such and such a day, which was a month later, and we'll pick you up. So we spent a month, well, just under a month, unsupported, paddling Nelson Island and various other islands on the Antarctic Peninsula. And this was one of the first expeditions that we did the three-piece kayaks for. So you can see the three-piece kayaks on the pallet in the back. This is Tom Berg from Maine. So there was Tom Berg, there was myself, and there was Stan Schladdock. So with Antarctica, whatever you take in, you have to bring out. So this is all the freeze-dried food and everything that we were taking. And here we're just preparing, unpacking all the packaging so we could leave all the packaging behind and burn it, and sort of put all the packaging and the food into the kayaks. So to get into Antarctica, you've normally got to do some sort of scientific research. So our host suggested that we throw ourselves in the sea and see how long we survived, and he could time us from how long it would take to get hypothermia. So we thought, well, that's not a very good idea. So we came up with the idea of a seal count. So we paddled around Nelson Island first, and we did the seal count, and we thought, well, if we do a seal count, there's no point with one seal count. You'll have to go back and do another one to compare the two. But it's quite interesting, really, because the yellow is where we decided it was safe for them to land with their ribs, because the scientific research stations weren't allowed to go anywhere around these islands on health and safety grounds. So once we'd gone round and were able to brief them where they could land their boats and things, they started going a bit further afield. So this plane came across in, I think it's Punta Arenas. And I can remember we had a look inside, and next to every seat is an oxygen bottle and an oxygen mask. And I can remember saying to the lads who were working on the engines, it's a twin engine Cessna, and I can remember saying, what are the oxygen bottles for? And they say, well, every year they fly from Germany. It's a group of scientists, they fly from Germany, they cross the Atlantic, and then they fly down the length of America and across into Antarctica. The problem is they don't have enough fuel to fly across the Atlantic, which is a bit of a problem. So what they used to do, they used to go as high as they could and turn off the engines and glide as far as they could. And they do that 3 times to cross the Atlantic. So what a way of getting across. We met a glaciologist called Olga in Antarctica, and she was studying all the glaciers over 30,000 years old. And she, in particular, she's looking at these dark lines in the glacier, and she could prove that there's been periods of time when there's far less ice than there is now. So obviously there's a cycle of melt and come back. I mean, whether that will still happen now, who knows? Elephant seals, big pods of elephant seals. Here's a disc from an elephant seal. And you can see I was quite lucky really, because I managed to get some real Inuit leather inner boots to go with my big wellies. Very good. Leopard seals. So we've left Antarctica and we're now back in Holyhead. And there's a guy called Ray Goodwin, which I'm sure some of you will know. Ray Goodwin had done a lot of training with these guys, and then he handed them over because they wanted to, they were specifically training to kayak from Holyhead to Dublin to raise money for charity. So myself and Axel and we took a support boat and we actually escorted these guys across. So lots of other training bits and teaching bits in between the expeditions. So obviously we all know Angus is very renowned for tidal waters and obviously full moon, spring tides, all sorts of conditions. So another shot here of Jeff, and here we're doing some, I don't know why we thought we'd need to do this sort of training, but there we go. This was pre going to South Georgia. Off North Stack, off South Stack here, you can see North Stack in the distance. This is again in the early days. Some of these photographs here were taken by Johan from Sweden. This is Simon Osborne, Nico, this is in Penrymar, Axel, Phil Clegg. Lots of good shots. And this is one of my favorite shots. Tom had asked me up to a symposium up at the club. And these ladies, I just asked Tom earlier whether they were still in Tyneside or wherever they came from. These were all over 60 and they called themselves the Seaweed Paddlers because they never went anywhere where they couldn't see seaweed. So if they couldn't see seaweed, they turned and went to land until they could see seaweed. So they called themselves the Seaweed Paddlers. And this lady here said to me, I'd like a sea kayak, but I want a rudder. I said, you don't want a rudder? She said, I want a rudder. I said, you sure you want a rudder? She said, yes, I want a rudder. I said, why do you want a rudder? She says, well, when I go out sea kayaking, I take an umbrella. And when I turn downwind, I put the umbrella up and hold it. And I said, you need a rudder. So she ordered her sea kayak with a rudder, and they're the Seaweed Paddlers. And I remember this weekend because none of them had been out to the farms, and they all said that it was too far for them. So we made sure that we got them out to the farms. And I can remember on the beach, landing on the beach on the way back, and having to wade out into the waves to catch these ladies as they were surfing back in and get them back onto the beach, hopefully without capsizing. So the Seaweed Paddlers. Three-piece kayaks. Three-piece kayaks are very good on expeditions. A, you can fly with them. And B, you can break them down on the beach and carry them up section by section. So done a fair bit of expedition paddling with three-piece kayaks. So these aren't my slides. There's 2 or 3 slides here from Peter Jones, who was on an expedition with Martin. So I'm sure Martin's giving a talk next, and this is Greenland coming in. So he'll be able to tell you far more about Greenland. I've not been to Greenland, but basically this slides in because I always tell people, I mean, with Antarctica and South Georgia and things, a lot of the problem is the pack ice. So a lot of the issue is making the decision in those sort of areas as whether you can get across a bay without the ice coming in, etc., etc. So pack ice is quite a problem. Here, this is one of these is Martin and Peter, I think, on the left here, using the kayaks as sledges. And top right is the photograph of it was, I think it's an Israeli expedition that were paddling around Spitsbergen. And you can see bottom left here, the kayaks being used as sledges on the pack ice. Top right, they didn't make it and the ice closed in and it actually took the stern of the boat off. So this particular expedition ended up getting rescued by a Russian helicopter. But just look at the damage the ice can do as it closes in. So every sea kayak is a good sea kayak until you get to about force 3. From force 3 onwards, the wind affects the sea kayak. So you've got to look at the volumes, you've got to look at the weight distribution, etc., etc. So every sea kayak should turn slightly to windward, and then you can drop the skeg. It's called weathercocking, and you can trim the boat. If you're paddling a skegged kayak and the skeg is down, no, let me get this right. Yeah, if the bow of the kayak gets blown downwind, the skeg is no use to you whatsoever. So you've got to pack kayaks so that they go slightly up into wind, and then you can trim them with the skeg. In all these areas, I would always go with a barometer. So here you can see it's just a Casio watch with a barometer. Basic rule, 6 millibars, if it drops 6 millibars in 3 hours, force 6, 8 millibars in 3 hours, force 8. Okay, so the faster the barometer drops and the further it drops, the harder it's going to blow. Now, 3 hours is no good to us. So we're looking for a 3 millibar drop in 1.5 hours. So you can start to work out, if you're looking for that and you're dropping 2 millibars in an hour, you know you're in for, maybe in for a bit of a problem. So if you're going to use a barometer, you really need, at the top of that, above the 1003, you'll see a record of the barometer. So each of those blops is a barometric reading that the watch has made. And it's actually very valuable because you can tell if a front's gone through. So on this, you can see it drop, drop, drop. It hits the bottom of the V and it starts to pick up again. So that's a sure indication that the weather front has gone through. So to me, a barometer is one of the best things. I mean, most places you can get forecasts now, but lots of places, some places you can't. This is a log from Cape Horn. And here it dropped 16 millibars in about an hour and a half. And it went up to 120 knots in 3/4 of an hour. So you can see the barometric readings and the wind speed there. So on this particular occasion, well, we could see the barometer dropping quickly. So we managed to land somewhere, still wasn't really windy, but within 3/4 of an hour, it picked up to 120 knots. Again, expedition log from Antarctica. It's not rocket science really, because you can get to somewhere and you can look at the seaweed and work out which way the tide flows when it comes in and goes out. And then you can have a good guess at the speed. So you're slowly building up all your information. And then obviously it's a bit later every day. And then if you keep your barometric log and the wind direction, I mean, what it proved here was that as the barometer drops, the wind picks up, but also the direction was very important, because in Antarctica, the different directions brought completely different conditions, i.e. sun and cold, or snow and wind, or wet and what have you. So slowly, if you keep your record, and I used to keep the temperature, the time, the barometric pressure, and physically what you saw on the sea. And slowly you can get to grips with the weather and end up, well, I mean, there's no weather forecast there anyway. Well, there might be now, but in those days there wasn't. Force 11, that's what the sea looks like in a Force 11, just turns to froth and foam. Windy sky in Scotland. So Scotland's a fantastic place to have a barometer. This is Sweden. And it took me a while to work out that basically you can go downwind for 3 miles in a Force 7 and probably downwind for 2 miles in a Force 8. But you've got to know where you're getting off, because what happens is you go downwind, the waves get bigger and bigger. So this is just setting off here. And it gets to the point where the waves don't support themselves anymore and just starts to collapse. So, yeah, paddling downwind in strong wind is no real problem, as long as you can control the kayak, stop it broaching, and what you've got to do is know where you're going to get off. So now we're at 2005, and it's another big expedition, South Georgia. South Georgia hadn't been circumnavigated, but there was another expedition from New Zealand who were going to South Georgia the same year. And they heard, we'd set our date, they'd heard when we were going, so they changed their date so they could become the first to paddle around South Georgia. So they did paddle around South Georgia. We did it in 13 days. I think they did it in about 2.5 weeks. But a pretty special place, South Georgia. The weather changes a lot. Again, same as Antarctica, you cannot go without being responsible for your own rescue. So that means you need a support boat. So we chartered the Pelagic Australis, which was skip Novak, retractable keel. I think it was something like £2,000 a day to charter this yacht with the crew. So the crew was Stephen at the top left, Magnus bottom left, and Joe top right. So there were 4 of us. There was Jeff Allen, there was Peter Bray, Hadass Feldman, and myself. So all these shots taken the same day. So the weather changes very, very quickly. It's a very mountainous area. And again, the support boat it's handy, but you can't rely on it because again, it's running for shelter as the winds pick up. So we shipped everything to Argentina, and then we went across to the Falklands and we chartered this yacht from the Falklands. So it's a 900-mile sail. We left the Falklands with 45, 50 knots across the deck. And I can remember saying to Steve, why are you going now? He said, because the weather's right. I said, what do you mean the weather's right? And he said, well, what we've got to do is time it so that when we're at the most vulnerable place in the middle of the crossing, that we've got favorable weather. So to do that, we have to leave in bad weather. Now, what we've always got to be careful of is most accidents happen off the water, actually. So Magnus bottom left here in this weather was going into the cabin, and this big steel door on the left shut on his fingers, and it took the tops of 2 of his fingers off. So it's being careful off the water, really. Now, this expedition meant that we had to obviously take all the kayaks and everything in. This expedition wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for Peter Bray and his manager called Jim Rowlinson. Unfortunately, Jim's died now, but when Peter Bray was in his heyday, he had a manager called Jim. So Pete would come up with these ideas and Jim would go off and get all the funding to do it. So we were down at in London at a kayak show, and we came up with the idea of paddling around South Georgia. So we put the team together, and as I said, it was Jeff Allen, Peter Bray, Hadass, and myself. And as with all these big expeditions, the sponsorship never comes in on time. So Pete actually put a lot of his money on the line to make this happen. And then obviously we managed to get sponsorship at the last minute. So if it wasn't for Pete and Jim, this expedition would have never happened. So again, launching the boats from the support boat is the most difficult thing. By far the easiest thing is to get them into a rubber dinghy and then climb into the yacht, the kayaks off the rubber dinghy. The wildlife in South Georgia is phenomenal. It's the best I've ever seen. Hadass, we used to call Hadass Two Hats, because Hadass came from Israel and was always cold. Pete won't like me saying it, but we used to call Pete Two Poos, because he'd have a poo before he got on, and then he'd always want another one, so we'd always have to land. So there was Pete Two Poos and Hadass Two Hats, and Jeff. So, but you can see the wildlife. These are female elephant seals. The male elephant seals are very, very aggressive, and the problem is the aggressive ones are waiting right down on the foreshore for the females to come in. So when you land, you push the aggressive males back a little bit. They go into the next seal's territory, and so on and so forth. So you have a lot of fighting and squabbling for about 15 minutes until everything settles down when you land. I don't know why Jeff insisted on flying the Cornish flag around South Georgia. As I said, it took us about 13 days. It's Shackleton's home. This is a slide I slip in because it sort of blends, but it's not from South Georgia. This again is one of Pete's shots from Greenland. Another one from Greenland. So this is South Georgia, and the same with Antarctica. The problem in paddling in this form of ice, especially when it's windy, is these small chunks of ice are pretty solid, really, and you start surfing and hitting those, and it can cause you a fair bit of trouble. In Antarctica, the boats were so heavy, as we surfed down, at the bottom of the wave, the whole boat and your spray deck was underwater. So the water would come up sort of waist high, and then you'd slowly pop back up again. So paddling heavy expedition boats in these areas sort of come with their own problems, really. Meat, how you take your meat on the board. As I said, Shackleton is buried on South Georgia. And he used to love South Georgia. He came back to visit and basically had a heart attack, and they say he came home to die. So this is his grave at South Georgia. Elephant seals, the male elephant seals are huge, but you can just see the wildlife, the penguins, everything. One of the issues of paddling in this sort of area, here you've got the inversion, you've got the clouds coming over the top of South Georgia. What we're looking for is we're trying to pick out the valleys and see what the clouds are doing in the valleys, because the first indication after the barometer, and sometimes even the barometer doesn't change, but if you see the clouds starting to rush down the valleys, then something's pushing the clouds, and it's the wind, and you've got your katabatic winds, and they increase pretty quickly. So South Georgia was quite a hard expedition because there was a lot of wind, and in fact on one occasion the wind blew Pete over, and unfortunately he rolled, because otherwise when it gets to that stage you're actually looking after yourself. You can't really look after other people. Obviously you shouldn't paddle into icebergs and things, but you can't really resist. But penguins are fantastic on South Georgia. Our first aid kit comprised of a bottle of hydrogen peroxide solution, toothbrush and antibiotics, because the fur seals will bite and they'll twist and they'll rip flesh out. So their mouths are full of so much bacteria that this is a valuable part of the first aid kit for seal bites. There's not a lot of whales around South Georgia because they took lots and lots of whales from the water, and they say that the whales still remember, so they're only just starting to go back to South Georgia, the whale population now. This is South Georgia again. Used to camp on the beach, and we used to set up, I don't know if we used to set the kayaks around the tents, because we could tie the tents to the kayaks, but the kayaks then formed a bit of a barrier for the seals so that we could hear if they were getting too close at night. Penguins, the penguins come into molt. These king penguins, and these are all the small penguins. Now, they come ashore, they obviously give birth, and here you can see at the same time the adults molt. So at this time of the year, none of them can actually go into the sea. So again, you've got to be quite careful that you're not disturbing things too much. Now with the penguins, they're fantastic. They sort of waddle around. If you lie down or sit down, all the penguins will come right up to you. If you stand up, they'll waddle away. Mating season, not quite sure what he's thinking. And hadass. So again, hadass was worried because on Cape Horn as well, in those days, there was a hole in the ozone layer down on the south and you'd get skin cancer. So hadass was pretty keen on keeping well covered up. So you can see the size of these glaciers as we paddled around. And you can see hadass here with all her anti-sun cream on. Now they say Shackleton had to hunt for his food. I mean, I'm not saying he didn't, but they're not hard to catch. You can see here that they haven't seen humans. They're really friendly. They don't run off. So it's a pretty spectacular place. Now we're, where's this? Oh, come on, someone help me. Where's this? This is the Faroes. Okay, so the Faroes are fantastic. All across the north coast of the Faroes, all the red are tide races and overfalls. If you ever get the chance to go to the Faroes, fantastic place to go. It is quite an advanced place to paddle purely because of the speed that the weather changes. If you're going to that neck of the woods, save some money and go. They get round the islands in helicopters, and it's fantastic at the end to be able to jump into a helicopter and just go around the different islands and see the scenery that you've paddled round. So a really spectacular place to go. And again, here in the Faroes, you've got designated whaling beaches. And you can see all the red dots are designated whaling spots. And you can see the sort of statistics of the amount of pilot whales and things that have been taken out. And basically they go out in small rowing boats and they form a horseshoe around the whales, and they basically drop stones in, and the whales pick these stones up on their sonar and they slowly drive them into a beach where they put a stainless steel hook in the air hole on a rope. They pull the pilot whales up and they quickly slice behind the neck. And they reckon it takes about 5 seconds to kill a pilot whale. A bit gruesome, but they actually do it to eat. So you've got the white meat and you've got the red meat. And the whole village comes down. They cut the fish up and they split it all up. And there's usually on the side of the container, top left there, you can see a list of all the families and they actually share all the meat between all the families. What's quite surprising is they're not meant to eat more than 2 meals a month, because the mercury content now in these whales is fairly high. And mercury is one chemical that the body doesn't flush out. So if you're not careful, it can mercury can accumulate. Fantastic place to go. And these are North Coast, big cliffs, spectacular scenery. So we're just going to fly around Britain. We're coming towards the end. This is St Kilda, Old Man Ahoy here on the West Coast. I think, Nick, you came with us on a trip one year, if I can remember, on the Boston Hornet. For a few years, we went up, we used to base ourselves in the Outer Hebrides, and Neil from the US Outdoor Centre had this magnificent rib, and he actually designed roof racks to go along the side. So we'd put the kayaks on the rib, and on the best day, we'd leave at 6 in the morning. We'd get out to St Kilda for sort of 10. We'd do a paddle around St Kilda, 2 or 3 hours hiking, and then back. But if you ever get the chance to go to St Kilda, fantastic place. This is Borray on the side of St Kilda. There's a village. St Kilda was evacuated in the 1930s because the Victorians thought that it was too harsh a land for the people to live on. But they actually used to they used to farm seabirds and sea eggs, and they'd pay their taxes in oil from fulmars. Every fulmar, you get about 1 litre of oil from a fulmar and all the feathers. And here you can see the groups that used to scale the cliffs farming the fulmars and the eggs. And here they're catching puffins. And they say that the local St Killian people actually had toes, long toes that grew, because they climbed barefoot, and they reckoned that they had long toes that slowly evolved, which helped them grip. I don't know whether there's any truth in that, but that's what they say. 4 generations of houses. This is the 2nd generation of house. The 1st generation house was literally underground with a roof on the top. So lots of history there. Fantastic place to go. Everything's much bigger. The seas are bigger. The caves are huge. The sea arches are huge. Everything's on a pretty spectacular scale at St Kilda. This is actually North Stack, the cave at North Stack. This is around the stacks. This is Wen Slab area. People here will know this area. This is Stack Lee at St Kilda, where there's the biggest colony of gannets in Great Britain. Monarchs. Anyone that goes out to the Outer Hebrides, if you go out, paddle out to the Monarchs, it's fairly sheltered. For I think 2 years, we ran the seal bonking expedition, which used to happen in September, because there's the biggest colony of seals in Europe meet on the Monarchs. There's about 50,000 seals meet. So you can relatively easily paddle out. It's about a 2-hour crossing. And you can get round the seals so you don't disturb them. You can land on some of the remote beaches, and then you have to walk back and sort of scramble over the sand dunes on your hands and knees and look down onto the seals. But pretty spectacular place to go. Mexico. Again in Mexico, big swells, warm weather, but here you can see seals. This is a shot. We have a few sponsored paddlers, and obviously Simon Osborne was sponsored, and he and Phil took 3-piece kayaks and they did Madagascar. So this is a shot from Madagascar. And wherever you go with kayaks in these remote areas, they always create so much interest from the locals. Recently, we've done, with Isla, I did 3 expeditions to the Bahamas. We did these chains of islands, and we went round Andros as well. Now, in the Bahamas, the sea goes, you can see there, it goes from 3,387 feet to 301 in a very short distance. And you get all these coral heads. This was the only place where I've had a serious incident where we thought the problem with paddling in that area, even if you try and stay in the reefs, you inevitably end up on the outside sometimes. And then you have to cross back across the coral reefs to get into the sheltered water. We thought we knew where we were. We thought we had a channel. We watched it for 20 minutes and then decided to go, and no. One wave hit us, we rolled, another wave hit us, another wave hit us. We both ended up out of our kayaks. So I managed to get right Isla's boat. Isla managed to get back in her boat. I couldn't understand why I couldn't get back in my boat until I realized that the whole of the back end had been stoved in. So I eventually sat in the boat, and it was sort of 45 degrees, and Isla had to put a tow line on the bow to stop me from being blown into the cliffs. And we managed to go down the coast in formation like that and land on a beach. And this, the whole seam had split, but it took about an hour to do a full waterproof repair on this kayak. And the next day we were back on the water. So 3-piece kayaks. If you're wanting to fly with kayaks, don't call them kayaks because they'll say no. I always call ours diving platforms. They don't know what a diving platform is, and they don't know what one looks like. So they never stop you flying if it's a diving platform. But basically, each kayak comprises of 2 bags. You put your bow and stern facing each other. You sort of tie them together, and then if you pay for 1 extra bag, you can fly with enough kit for an expedition without the food. So if you go sort of mid-class, they usually let you take 2 bags, and then you just pay for 1 extra bag. So 3-piece kayaks do enable you to get around the place. And here again, we're going out to some of the outer islands. These iguanas, if you're going to land on iguana infested beaches and things, land after 6. They go to bed at 6. And if you land before 6, they won't go to bed. And if you're away before 10, because they're all reptiles, they lie in the sun until they warm up before they start to move around. So you land after 6 and you leave before 10 and you're fine. Otherwise, you're in for a bit of pester. Again, you get bad weather in the Bahamas, but normally no more than about a force 5, 6. This is scrounging a ride with the broken kayak to sort it out. Locals very, very friendly. Now, Andros is actually an expedition that I think a lot of, because this is Nassau, top right-hand corner. So we did a 20-mile crossing to Andros, and it's a 400 nautical mile. But for the whole of the west coast, and most of the coast, apart from 3 places, there is no water at all. So on this expedition, we calculated how long it was going to take us, and we left fully self-contained to include water, not knowing if we had enough water to complete the expedition, because we knew there was no water for 3/4 of that trip. First time I used a solar panel. From this one solar panel and a battery, charged 2 cameras, 2 phones, and actually a small computer. And that's all we needed to keep 2 of us fully charged. I know you're not meant to paddle with stuff on the deck, but sometimes needs must. So because we're a month out with all the water and all the food, we had a lot of kit. So this is just, these are 10-litre bags. So we had 30 litres of water in bags on each kayak, plus another 10 litres inside the kayaks in small bottles. Again, be a little bit wary. Happened in Antarctica, happened in the Bahamas. The silver compasses are affected by the UV light, and they go really yellow to the point where you can't read the compass. So if you go into those areas, I'd take a spare compass. And this is just paddling along the coast. James Bond film, you go snorkeling, you see all sorts of stuff. This is the actual plane that was used in the James Bond film. You get a lot of sharks there. This is Miko shark. These are all shots just taken by putting the camera under the water. So this is a bit of video, but we haven't really got time. Massive big rays. Again, for sea life, it's a fantastic place to go. And then recently, Mexico, Ginny Callahan, another expedition center. Any of you that want to go somewhere really nice, somewhere really remote and pretty safe, go to see Ginny in Mexico, because you get good weather. It might work out reasonably expensive, but it's a fantastic trip for people of all levels. Really good place to go, Mexico. And on the way, if you want to, you can swim with the whale sharks, and you actually do see quite a lot of whales in the Bahamas. So good place to go. So yeah, that's all I have. I've probably gone on a little bit too long. I'm not quite sure. So yeah, that's the end of this talk, Tom. It's a bit weird. I can't judge the audience because you don't hear anyone. So I don't know, and I can only see 5 people. So I don't know if everyone else is still there, whether you're asleep, whether you've buggered off and made a cup of tea or something. So it's quite strange giving a talk on Zoom because you can't see, you don't get the feedback from the audience.
Well, I thoroughly enjoyed that, Nigel. Thank you very much.
Who was that?
Andrew.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much, Andrew.
Sounds like you've had a really interesting life.
Well, yes, can't complain. I hope you've still got a bit more to go.
You've inspired me and Cora to plan some expeditions.
I didn't hear all of that, but
that's probably my Geordie accent.
Yeah, I'm used to listening to Craig and Stuart.
Well, I'm probably a bit thicker than them, a bit thicker accent. But you've inspired me and Cora to look at doing some expeditions.
Well, honestly, guys, the only lesson that people have to learn is to know their limitation and know when to say no. And don't be worried, because it's a series of one-day trips. And if it doesn't feel right, don't get on the water. It's no different to paddling from home. And it's the unknown that stops people doing it, I'm sure.
Yeah. It's really refreshing to hear that from you, from somebody. Because yeah, I know a lot of, you've got to do a lot of training and things like that normally. But
yeah. The really dangerous ones are the Rambos. Don't go with the Rambos. They'll have you in trouble. Peer pressure, terrible thing. Just say no. You go, I'll stay here. I think, Tom, I don't know where Tom's gone, because there were a list of questions, weren't there?
Nigel, if you turn off your share screen,
Yeah,
and you should be able to see everybody then.
there we go.
Tom, you're on mute. Not sure if you realise.
I can bring Tom.
I've unmuted. Can you hear me now?
I can,
Yeah.
yes.
Good. So, Nigel, as Andrew was saying there, that you've inspired him and Cara. You've inspired me, and you've inspired lots of people.
Well, a couple out of 90 is not bad, is it?
Who inspired you, and who's been a help to you along your journey?
Well, that's a difficult question, really, because we were inspired by ourselves. And in those days, there was no one to teach us. So, as I said before, it took us a couple of years to just get out doing it. I mean, it's not rocket science, it's time in the saddle. And, you know, a lot of people can't even roll, but that doesn't matter because you never capsize once you know when to say no. So as long as there's two or three of you and you can sort each other out, it's really something that everyone can do. So I think the person that obviously I learned the most off was Paul Caffin, because after the circumnavigation, Paul Caffin had saved up all his money to circumnavigate Britain, and I'd actually sorted out the sponsorship. So at the end of that trip, Paul said to me, do you fancy paddling around Australia? And I thought about it, and I'd only just finished Britain because it was only 6 months later, and I thought, well, no, we'll start something. Joni and I will start something. And obviously I was married to Joni, and I didn't think that was very fair, and I didn't want to end up just becoming a kayak bum. But Paul went on to be the first person to truly circumnavigate Australia. So Paul's seamanship skills, which are probably the most important thing from sea kayaking, is just knowing the sea, really. I learned a lot from Paul, for sure. And on that expedition, it was lucky, it sounds funny, not being big-headed, but I was the stronger paddler, but Paul was the most determined paddler and the most experienced paddler. So I learned a lot off Paul, and Paul was a loner. And if I hadn't been a strong paddler, I'm sure Paul had just left me, to be honest with you. I mean, sometimes we were paddling 2 miles apart, and Paul was fanatic about keeping his boat dry. So when he wasn't looking, I'd put a bit of water in his boat, and I'd enjoy the rest of the day seeing him hunt around trying to work out where the water was coming in. But that's what gave me a kick. So, and then the other people that have inspired me, as I said before, Sam Cook in particular from Pateley Bridge. And I remember on the west coast of Ireland, Sam was helping me lead an expedition, and we led the whole expedition. At the end of the expedition, Sam said to me, I'm going to give you your advanced proficiency, which was the qualification before the 5 stars. So that was kind of good because I didn't even know I was being assessed. So Sam, did a lot with Sam over the years, and then Derrick and Frank, the banter between those two was fantastic. I remember Derrick Hutchinson at a symposium saying that 17'6" was the perfect size for a sea kayak. And Frank Goodman got up and said, what are you talking about? You're talking a load of rubbish, Derrick. And this argument went on and on and on. And then eventually Frank said, well, come on, Derrick, why on earth is 17'6" the perfect length for a kayak? And he said, because my garage is 17'7" long. So all the P&H boats ended up being 17'6" long because Derrick's garage is 17'7" long. So yeah, they're the people that inspired me, the early ones, Tom. Sorry, I went on a bit too much then, didn't I?
No, that was excellent. And I think it was 16'9", but never mind. It always interests me, this close relationship. When I used to paddle a valley boat before I paddled an NDK boat, and people presented it as some huge competition. but to see that a lot of what you did came out of your relationship with Frank Goodman was amazing. That you used to make the boats on the
Well,
side.
Frank Goodman actually helped a lot, and it wasn't just Frank Goodman. Who worked with Frank? I've forgotten his name, but yeah, I mean, I was a valley paddler for probably the first 10 years of my kayaking, and I always swear at Frank because I said I needed a boat to paddle around Nordkap, so they asked me to come down, and they gave me this Nordkap, and it was a Nordkap standard hull with no skeg. Well, if you've ever tried to paddle a Nordkap without a skeg, full of kit in strong wind, that's a mean task. So unbeknown to me, I'd never sat in the bloody thing before until I got to Cape Horn. So that was another issue. But yeah, but Frank helped me a lot over the years, Valley.
Excellent. And what are your links like to the people? So you don't say that you've inspired these people, but I know differently. So Craig, Stu and Lee were inspired by you. What are your links like with Phil, Simon, James, Kieran?
No, we see each other all the time. I mean, I go to Kieran, the Isle of Man, all the time. Kieran's running a very good business over there. Well, they're all running good businesses now. Yeah, I mean, I'm a bit older, so I can't kick ass like I used to, but yeah, I'm still out there paddling and still seeing them. I think the most rewarding stuff is probably at the level that you do, you know, Tom, with the club and things. I mean, I can always remember, it's happened to me twice. When I had the centre, I had someone turn up one day with a kayak on the roof, and he just said he'd come to the centre from Liverpool, and he was sent as an underprivileged kid, and must have been 10 years later, he'd managed to get a kayak, took up kayaking, and he came all the way back to the centre just to thank us for a week's course that happened years ago. So that was pretty spectacular. And then there's one other guy that I met on Anglesey, employed an electrician to do some work for us, and he came in, he said, "Are you Nigel?" I said, "Yes." He said, "You won't remember me." He said, "I came to the centre, your centre, and I'm called Vaughan." Well, as soon as he said Vaughan, I knew him, and he turned up at the centre, and he had Mohican haircut, he had shorts on, and he was, just a guy that came with a, "Watch this guy, he's trouble." And in those days, the YTS said to me, "How do you justify having all these underprivileged kids and charging us this money?" So I did a sheet where we assessed them participating in the activities, doing the washing up, helping each other, all that sort of stuff. And 9 times out of 10, every kid that came with a warning ended up student of the week. So Vaughan ended up student of the week, and I can remember him having khaki trousers, and we went to football, and he, because we used to have to keep them occupied day and night, otherwise they create havoc. So we got to the gym, and he pulled out a pair of shorts. I thought, bugger me, we're winning. But he put his shorts over his khaki shorts just to play football. Anyway, this guy was student of the week, and 2 months later, he was sent down for beating up a policeman with a pickaxe handle. So it just, over the years, I just think it's a fantastic vehicle for getting people out and showing them different side of life, really.
Wonderful, wonderful, Nigel. How about other people that are here? Does anybody else have any questions for Nigel? If not, I'll ask him. Sorry.
I've got a question. What plans do you have for future expeditions?
after COVID, I assume. Yeah, I've got lots of things that I would like to do, but I don't feel I have. I mean, when I was younger, for some reason, if you go somewhere cold and nasty, it's an expedition. If you go somewhere warm and sunny, like the Bahamas, it's a holiday. And I never quite work out why you have to go somewhere cold and nasty to be doing an expedition. So I must admit, the warmer climates are more attractive. And I think I suppose my one regret is, it's all very nice doing these expeditions, but you're on a timeline, and whenever the weather's good, you're paddling. And when the weather's bad, you can't do anything else because it's blowing its balls off. So you end up only being on and seeing the sea. And the land changes, but there's so much you miss on land. So I quite fancy going to interesting places, but using the kayak more as a tool to get into interesting islands and then explore on foot rather than just paddle every day. So I like wildlife, and I like getting to out of touch places. So I think it'll be more that type of thing that I do in the future rather than trying to be a first or trying to go faster than anyone else or all that sort of stuff. I suppose it's getting old.
I think
getting old or sensible, Nigel.
Hey?
It's either getting old or getting sensible.
Oh, well, I'd rather be old than sensible.
Yeah, just a question, Nigel.
Yeah.
Referring back to your time up at Spitsbergen, Svalbard, I've been lucky enough to do a wildlife cruise up there, and there are many polar bears, and they would actually come and sniff us for food or sniff us as a potential meal. And there are many warnings about getting round the islands alone. So I'm just surprised that you sort of got away with it.
Right. Well, put you a little bit straight, because when I showed that picture, I said that was Sam Cook and his colleagues. So I personally haven't paddled in Spelberg,
right,
but I know a bit about paddling in polar bear areas, and I'm sure the talk next week from Martin will cover a lot more paddling with polar bears than I've ever done.
Right.
But you have to rig up the campsite, keep the food separate. You have tripwires and cartridges that go bang and all this jazz, and then you keep a gun under your sleeping bag just in case. But I'm sure Martin will elaborate more on that. So I'm sort of not quite the right person to ask about that.
Okay, yeah. I know our guides were, if they took us ashore, they were armed with rifles.
Yeah.
I mean, hopefully they wouldn't use them, and if you do use it, you end up in trouble, not the bear. But
yeah, well, the problem with the polar bear is that they actually think and hunt rather than just come to eat, if you get what I mean. So they can be a bit sneaky as well.
Oh yes, yeah. Okay, thank you. Are you in a boat? Are you on board somewhere?
I am. I live on a boat.
Oh right, lovely. Thank you.
So yes.
Okay. Any more questions?
Yeah, Nigel. I was just wondering what the most difficult part of paddling around England was.
The firing ranges. There's a lot of military ranges around Britain. I mean, obviously you've got the obvious things like the weather changes reasonably quickly and things, but there are a lot of, the good thing about Britain is there's lots of coves and things, and there's usually somewhere you can get in. But the biggest, because we were going fast, or trying to go fast, the same as Craig and Stuart and that were doing, we used to cut our mileage down to, we used to like to average about 45 miles a day on a good day. So I hate sea crossings because they're just boring and they're gamble. the biggest sea crossings we did were sort of around the 40-45 mile. But when you're straight lining it, you come across a lot of tank ranges and firing ranges. So if you're not careful, you have to wait. But we decided we wouldn't wait because there is a bylaw which says if you're a bona fide traveller, you declare yourself and they have to stop firing. So we adopted the policy of going up to the support boat, waving at them and carrying on and forcing them to stop, which perhaps is not the wisest thing to do because we did on a couple of occasions have a bit of live ammo flying around. But they were definitely the worst part of paddling around Britain, just the man-made stuff rather than the natural stuff.
Yeah, okay, I see.
Thanks, Nigel.
Probably not the answer you wanted. Are you thinking of paddling around?
Yeah, I'm sticking to paddling around.
Yeah.
Paddled on one trip this summer, and it was yeah, really difficult. But
I think the areas of tide, like up at Cape Wrath, I can remember waiting for half a day for that to settle down and things like that. But again, we're just back to knowing your limitations and knowing when to say no and don't do anything too stupid, really. Because the other problem is you're paddling full boats, so it's not quite the same as paddling an empty boat either.
yeah.
But yeah.
Okay, folks, a couple more questions. Anybody else got a question? If not, I'll ask one. So, Nigel, a lot of talk about the paddling, but one of the things that amazes lots of us is your boat design. How do you know? I find it amazing that you can both be so established as a paddler and run a factory and do all that work. How do you find the balance between your paddling and your manufacturing?
Well, I suppose we're probably the biggest manufacturer of fiberglass sea kayaks in the UK now, because a lot of the other manufacturers do a lot more plastic than we do. So I went through a period of time where the factory dictated everything. So, but now, including me, there's 20 employees in the factory. So I've got it to a level where I can go away for probably up to a month without too much going wrong. And as long as I've got a computer and stay online, I make it my job to process all the orders and process all the orders. So just by checking on kayak numbers that come through the different stages, I know exactly what's happening in the factory. And that's the only way I can sort of take time out and still know what's happening. So I used to do a lot of paddling, and it's not rocket science designing boats, because if you're a good paddler, a reasonable paddler, you know what you like and what you don't like. When you're designing a boat, the biggest thing you've got to think about is the size of person you're designing it for and the size of their feet, believe it or not, because they've got to get their feet in the thing. So I did a lot of paddling and then started designing and building, and then a lot of factory work. And now, because we're a lot more established, I can come out of the factory a bit more, Tom. But I still spend a fair bit of time on that horrible electric computer thing. But that's what I have to do.
Right. So I'm suggesting we wrap it up here, unless anybody's got any questions to ask desperately.
Yes,
sure
I would like to ask a couple of questions, please, if
Is that
possible.
George?
Yeah, that's me. Okay. First one is about boat design. So
Yeah.
I would like to ask you about the latitude.
Yeah.
The latitude seems to have quite a lot of rocker,
yeah,
in comparison with any other boat. But I've read recently that you've reduced the amount of rocker on the latest
Yeah, we've
latitude.
just tweaked the latitude, so it's got a bigger cockpit on it, a wider cockpit. The bow's taken some of the volume out of the bow, and we've reduced the rocker line a little bit. We could have reduced it more, but everything's a balance between playing in the races and the waves and going fast. So, yeah, in my opinion, we probably could have taken more rocker line out, but there's advantages and disadvantages of both. But the new Latitude has got a little bit less rocker, but yeah, and a wider cockpit rim and reshaped bow.
Okay, great. And second question is, does both of the plastic Romanis, the Sport and Sportive, do you really think that they could last under the Greek sun? I mean, will they deform? So usually the problem is that
right. Let me tell you what the problem is, George. The problem is when they mold a shell, they take it out of the mold and they cool it. Now, if they cool it properly and it cools slowly and you don't lose the shape, then it should be fine. Now, the problem is if it cools and you get dishes, you can get them out when you make the boat, but when you put it back in the sun, plastic has a memory and it oil cans and things. So our boats are single skin up to 5 millimeter thick in the wear areas. So I think you'll find that ours hold their shape reasonably well because it's high, it's a stiff plastic, George, but any plastic boat doesn't like being left on a sandy beach with all the sun all the time. I mean, just taking it into shade would help tremendously. And what they really don't like is being cinched out, tied tightly down on a roof rack, and then in the sun, you'll get big distortions. I don't think it's our plastic boat, that's any plastic boat, George.
Yeah, I know I've had problems with several, but I'm only doing NDKs now, you know that.
I haven't had any real complaints about them distorting in the sun, and we've sent quite a few to Australia now. So, but we're really careful. If we get something that's a bit out of shape before we do all the assembly work, we'll make sure that that goes to a cold country and track it. And then if there's any issues, we can sort it. But normally, normally the moldings that are perfect have to go to the hot countries to get less problems, if that makes sense.
Okay, that's very specific, and thank you for that, Nigel and George. But we'll lose the audience if we're too specific.
Sorry.
It's okay. So thank you all very much for this evening. Thank particularly to Nigel. This is meant to be humorous. The club charged £2.50, and we're going to save that money and buy NDK trolleys to help us move forward. Did you get that, Nigel?
Yeah, but they're very expensive, you know. You can get cheaper ones.
Okay.
But I have also, just to finish quickly, just obviously Martin Rickard, who's been here, Martin and I was Martin's best man, so we've known each other for a long, long time, and I actually did a training course to learn how to sea kayak way back in 81, I think it was, and Martin and I were at the same centre for a year. So Martin's an expedition centre in Greenland, and I'm sure he'll have a very good talk next week. So it's Martin talking next week. I think that's correct, isn't it, Paul?
10th of December.
10th of December. Oh, he's got a bit of time to practice then. Yeah.
And hard act to follow, Nigel.
So that's me finished, folks.
Hold on, Nigel. It's just reminded me. I heard this story, and I think it was that you were Martin's best man.
Yeah.
And that you windsurfed.
No one else would do it.
And you windsurfed to the ceremony?
Oh, I don't know. I can't remember that. Did we
Yeah,
windsurf?
he windsurfed from Trada Bay to Roscollin Beach, which is where I was getting married, in his top hat and tails. And then we went to the ceremony from there.
And did he bring his present to you with him?
Yeah, it was a little black rabbit, which he presented to my wife at the disco afterwards. He was too tight to buy a proper present, so he found this black rabbit, put it under his top hat. Last minute thought. And then during the Eurythmics or something at the disco at the beach hotel, he took off his hat, and then there was this bloody rabbit on his head. And that's Nigel.
That was a
Nigel
long
for
time
you.
ago. My windsurfing days.
Yeah.
So anyway, you've made it, Mark. You're still married.
Well, yeah.
Okay, everybody. What an enormously fantastic talk. Thank you all for being here. Thanks, Nigel, and thanks, Martin, and everybody else who's getting involved. Yaki da.
All right.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
very
Tom.
much.
Cheers, Nigel. Thanks.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Okay,
I'd
thank
have to
you.
turn this off, Nigel.